Now, just about anybody with a little bit of teaching, coaching, and online help, hopefully using the resources from this channel, can create a food plot, and they can grow a food plot well. If you mix the type of seed that you have for the conditions in your soil and your planting conditions, and when you get moisture, sunlight, enough sunlight for the type of seed variety you have, you'll get beautiful fields of green. But that's not what food plotting is about. Food plotting for deer, we're in southeast Minnesota right here, but it wouldn't matter if we were in northern Minnesota. This food plot that we have on this side behind Dylan isn't supplying the nutrition to actually make sure that deer live through the winter time. Also, you can see we have lots of alfalfa around here. We have cornfields, there's a lot of ag, but it doesn't matter even if you're in a northern wilderness setting. You're also not supplying enough food to really change the amount of pounds that a deer packs on before wintertime, during wintertime, and really improving their survivability. Now they're saying you can actually make a little bit of difference in nutrition, but can you or can you not? You know, a lot of places there's 5 times more food that deer need during the summer growing season, even if you're in a remote wilderness area. But bottom line is, you plant a food plot, you can get it to look green, you can get it to look pretty, deer will eat it. But again, that's not the trick. You know, if you're just planting food plots out there and saying, well, I'm trying to help the herd, you're not really helping the herd unless you're not really helping your hunt, because you have to help both at the same time. You can't improve the herd without improving your hunt. You can't have a great hunt without a great herd. They both go together. But you can't do that with a food plot unless the deer actually use it during the daytime. And what I mean by that is if you have a food plot and the deer are only using it during the middle of the night, not only are you not meeting their necessary food needs during the day, but that means they're not bedding close, they're not on your land, you're not advancing them to the next age class. You're creating a nocturnal property all around. Like, these deer are hitting this food plot 3 hours after dark. That means they're living somewhere else. That means I can't hunt them. I have no control over the herd makeup or structure, whatever I want. If I want to shoot every buck out here that's small, well, I'm not going to be able to if the deer are living off the property, of course, during the daylight. If I want to maximize the buck age structure out here and promote a good, healthy age class where we have older bucks, representation of older bucks, we have that high-end strategy that we can kind of employ, that we want to employ, that we love to hunt with, and try to match wits with that older buck, then we can do so if we have daylight parcels. But if we have nocturnal parcels, we're ruining every goal that we have. So how do we make a food plot be a daylight parcel and not a nocturnal parcel? Unfortunately, and this is a common problem, and a lot of people don't really look at themselves in the mirror and say, boy, I've got a problem with this. Or a lot of problems that they don't admit when they look in the mirror. But when you're talking about food plots, a lot of folks don't admit that they have a problem when it comes to nocturnal deer use. They'll even say things like, well, the deer are nocturnal because they're hitting acorns. They don't want to come out into the woods to hit the food plots. No, they love hitting green food plots. They're not hitting the green food plots because you applied too much hunting pressure early and you've pushed them so far off the food plots, they'll feel comfortable bedding 300-400 yards away, that for most people that's off their property and they're turning their attention elsewhere to safer and greener pastures. So what happens is you have to have these daylight parcels. If they're nocturnal, you ruin everything. We find that the majority of our clients we go to, they're really into this. They're spending a lot of money on their land, their equipment, their gear that they have. They're fanatical hunters. And you'll take a fanatical hunter. I was at someone's property in West Virginia a couple weeks ago when I was working out of Ohio. And in Ohio, they've shot some bucks, a couple in the 180s, 190, almost 200 inches, several over 170 in total. But in West Virginia, it was a little bit different because that's his home property. He's putting food plots out, water holes, mock scrapes. And anytime you start adding those attractions, with food plots being the biggest level of risk, then the deer can pattern you a lot more than you pattern them if you don't hunt those food sources appropriately. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that on 40 acres because you put these big, beautiful food plots out here. Well, how do they relate to your land and access? How do you get away with hunting your land, still having that food, and still having those mature bucks that call home because they feel safe enough on your land? Well, a couple parts about that is, we'll talk about screening. We'll talk about what we do to hide our access in and around these plots. It's so critical. But one of the things, we need to have enough depth back in the cover. So when we look back into the cover here, we want to make sure that these food plots are over on the edge of our land, which Dylan's about 10 feet from the line right now, out into the ag field. So we want to make sure that we have 200, 300, 400 yards back into the cover where we can actually hold deer. Because if this food plot is on our neighbor's edge, then we're putting all those deer on the neighbors. And if they hunt haphazardly, if they hunt at all, then they're looking at those deer all daylight instead of the deer that are on our property. And their deer on our property are only coming over the last half hour. And if those neighbors cut us off, they're not coming out here at all. So part of it is we want to have the food plots a lot of times off to the edge of the land rarely in the middle that you can't access without spooking deer. We want it off to the edge so we develop that depth that we have back into the cover. So that's part of it. You have to have that depth in order to hold bucks so they'll be out here during the daylight in the first place. You don't want to have them cross large areas of open hardwoods to get here during the daylight, because those mature bucks don't want to do that. They'll stay back in the cover. They'll transfer through that 150 yards of open cover right in the afternoon, and then they'll get to here well after dark. So all that being said about bedding areas and cover and depth of cover, well, you really have to first start off with the screening edge. These food plots have to be screened. Our access is out here somewhere. We either come into the end over there, to this end, through this draw over here. But bottom line is we have to be able to get into stand locations or around this food plot without spooking deer. So in that case, we have about 15 to 18 feet of switchgrass edge right through here. This switchgrass gets to 7-8 feet tall, and that's that first line of defense. Now, it's just not us that we're trying to screen deer from. We're trying to screen deer from each other. Imagine if there's a herd of deer out here and there's deer down here. They get stressed out seeing that movement out here. That's deer. It's different. What about a coyote coming through? What about a person? What about a tractor going by? They don't like it. So that makes it so those deer stay back on this edge and they don't fully use this parcel during the daylight. That's why this screening wall is so critical. You want the deer to feel safe anywhere they are in this food plot. Now, this food plot's a big food plot. It's about 2 acres. This isn't a food plot that we would consider. This is definitely a hunting plot where we'd sit over with a bow. We do have a blind. We'll talk about that, how we get in and out of that without spooking deer. But that first wall, that screening wall, is to hide deer from deer and deer from ourselves. And so that's really critical that we have that and we start to make those deer feel secure in here. Now, the second thing is when we get down here along this hardwood edge all the way around, we want to have screening. So we want to have 6-8 feet of switchgrass in this case, and then we have hardwood regeneration in the form of hinge cuts and total cuts where we cut down those trees. We give it more of a feathered edge, a soft edge, where we have grasses, shrubs, hardwood regeneration, and finally hardwoods. What that does is it pulls those deer that are bedding on the inside closer to that food plot edge because they can't see right out in the open. When they can't see out in the open, they feel more comfortable. Just like the screening wall right here on the outside of the plot, it's the same on there. They'll feel more comfortable drawing closer to that edge. That means we pull doe bedding close to this, within 30 to 40 yards of this edge. Does and fawns we can count on bedding. That means they're out there in the woods. We pull that bedding closer, and what does that do? That frees up space for mature bucks in the background. So that means that we can actually bed and sandwich and layer those deer in closer to this food plot. Again, that allows them to travel a lot less to get to this food. And what does that do? It puts them on this food plot a lot earlier in the afternoon. So we have the screening. We have the screening on the outside. We have the screening on the inside edge, towards the woods, towards the cover where we expect the deer to bed. That pulls them closer, that allows them to get here during the daylight a lot faster. Then we work on bedding areas not that far into the timber, where we're either using hinge cuts for medium or young age timber, or older timber. We're doing canopy drop down so we get sunlight, or maybe a forestry plan where we're actually having a timber harvest in here and getting hardwood regeneration, and we're getting more habitat in here. Maybe this is an upland setting. We're trying to diversify the area, like we're doing over across the fields over here in an old field conversion, where we want a lot of diversity in there. We want to hold deer and make them feel protected with switchgrass, screening layers. But bottom line is we want to draw those deer to make sure they're closer to here in the afternoon bedding, and that'll get them out here during the daylight. So we have the outside screening, the inside screening. We're working on the timber in there, and we're starting to develop those layers. Now we want to have a food plot that's actually active the entire fall. So if we have a food plot, let's say we're planting a late season food source like beans in here, we protected them, then we have that hard bean that the deer want to hit in December and January. Well, what about September, October, November? If they're not hitting that food source, whatever it might be, maybe just straight brassica, if they're not hitting that food source until December, then they're not going to be using this during the daylight for the bulk of the season. That's a bad thing too. I want the deer out here recognizing this food plot early and establishing their fall pattern, late summer pattern here so that they can hold for the entire season. That way we can actually match our goals of wanting to hold bucks, protect bucks, have a great hunt. So we need to have a diversity of forage. We choose our Big Boost brassica, our fall power greens. We actually have a third of this to a half of this in corn usually. And so we want that ultimate diversity so that we have the fall power greens early, or they're more candy crops. Then we have the brassica, we have the corn offered in there. So we have something that they like to eat. And then we also cover that, usually the fall power greens with rye. So we have something growing in the spring. But bottom line is, from late August, early September, all the way through spring, we have something out here. That means the deer can not only draw their attention to this food, but to the bedding that relates to this food. If they're relating to that bedding, they're relating to this food source, then we have them. And then we have them in the stand locations over off to the side that's a water hole. Bedding area stands off to the sides that are more on the back side of bedding, in between bedding for cruising. Then all those stands are at play during the entire season if they're hitting this daylight. Does it make sense if we spook a random deer 200 yards away by a bedding area? That's not as bad as spooking them out here, because if we spook them out here, they're not in those bedding areas. They're not using the water holes. They're not using the bedding areas. They're not using our cruising stands, and it's all for naught. So again, protecting this from the outside, protecting from the inside, working on the habitat to hold deer. And then we have to have a diversity of food source that they can actually hold their attention for the entire season, not just one portion of the season. And that's why we want diversity in all our food plots, because we don't want the deer here on one food source going over there to another food source, because then again, we have dead stands, dead water holes, dead bedding areas. We want to have these same diversity spread pretty evenly throughout the entire property so that we can actually have an efficient herd that's not being bumped back and forth when one forage attracts on one plot versus another for the entire year. So that diversity of forage is key. And then how we hunt this. I like to be able to hunt it. In this case, it's so big that it's hard to hunt with a bow. So we hunt with a bow 150 yards that way on a water hole. At the end and around this corner on a small food plot where it's just a 1/4 acre, we hunt from behind a brush pile. We go down into the woods. We have a bedding area back there that relates to this, and another bedding area about 400 yards away. We hunt in between there for cruising bucks. So all those stands work because deer are attracted to this during the daylight. But we do hunt this with a gun. And you see the redneck right over here. And we take great pains to get into here. So we have the switchgrass layer up there. We have our deer fence screening blend that we'll put about 16 feet wide in front of the switchgrass, all the way down that pocket, all the way across. So we're fully rimming this in with a lot of cover. We have the switchgrass 6 to 8 feet all the way around. We have the hardwood cuttings, regeneration on the sides. And then we have our redneck off to the side. We've chosen to blend it in with the trees so the profile doesn't stick out. We pulled all those logs in front of there from clearing a portion of this food plot. We're actually having big rock trees or stabbing hybrid willows, hybrid poplars, silky willows, shrubs and trees into those logs so it grows up so it's further protected. And that's the corner of the food plot that we can get into without spooking deer, meaning it goes down and low into a pocket behind that stand. So we can actually have deer right out here in the middle of this plot. We can sneak down the back. They don't see us getting out on the rail and on the little porch. We can go down and those deer don't see us. We'll even wrap that deer fence right in front of the blind and then switchgrass around that. So we have total protection getting up and down out of that blind. And as long as we're quiet, which I'd rather take 5 minutes to get out of that blind than take 5 seconds or 20 seconds and make a bunch of noise. But as long as we're quiet, we're already blowing our scent that way anyways. We just get out, stay low, get behind the screening and get out of here. Go the opposite direction and get out of here. So that's a part of it too. Whether you're bow hunting that plot or you're gun hunting, you have to get in and out of your blind or stand without spooking deer ever. Now, it's one thing if you spook them in early September and you don't do it again till mid-October and you don't do it again till mid-December, but how many people do that? A lot of people spook them early, they spook them again the next weekend, and the third weekend they wonder why there's no deer out in the parcel, out in the food plot, and that's called a nocturnal food plot by that point. Because of the repeated pattern of hunting pressure, it doesn't become a daylight food plot for the rest of the season. You have to have all these steps in place. The type of food and diversity, the screening on the inside and outside edges, the screening to get in and out of your blind or stand, whether you're using the elevation changes, the lay of the land, or you're providing screening on top of that, or all of the above to get in and out. But you have to get in and out. You have to be quiet. That's why I use quality stands and blinds. Our family tradition stands are high quality USA steel, made in the USA in Michigan, Charlotte, Michigan. We use high quality components so that we're quiet getting in and out so that we can actually come into the edge of a big food plot like this and have a great hunt and not spook deer. But it's all about not spooking deer. How many of your food plots are daylight? If the answer isn't all of them, severe changes have to be made. You know, I had one management company group there telling me, we think that one food plot on the entire property should never be hunted. That's a really poor way to look at it. Instead, to the deer herd and to the local deer herd, every food plot on your property should appear unhunted to the local deer herd, because the damage of one nocturnal plot becomes contagious, because usually what you're doing on that one plot to make it nocturnal spreads throughout all of the plots in the property. The answer is every single one of your food plots to the deer herd should appear unhunted, and when you accomplish that, you can accomplish great things with your herd and hunting goals, because you can't have a great herd without a great hunt. You can't have a great hunt without a great herd, and a lot of it boils back down to how much protection you give these daylight parcels. Think about it. A food plot, out of all the attractions on your land, is the highest form of risk, highest level risk to the local deer herd. A water hole, very low risk. That's why you don't put a water hole in a food plot, because now you're taking the water hole that's very low risk and increasing the level of risk to what a food plot or a food source is. That's a bad thing. We want water holes off to the side 50, 100 yards away, so that we can actually hunt those during the day, and a buck could come there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 11 o'clock in the morning and hit it. And he feels very comfortable, because the second he steps a foot out into an open food plot, he feels a lot higher level of risk. But I want your food plots on your property to be the lowest food source risk in the area. And when you accomplish that, again, great things happen. You have a great hunt. It affects all of your stands, the entire layout on your land, makes everything productive for you, makes your land efficient for you. It helps you get the most per acre out of your hard-earned dollars and work that you put into the land. And, by the way, do all that, have a great herd, have great land, make all your stands in play. You can't help but have a great hunt this fall, and that's what I want for you. Now, I don't know if you've checked out our main website lately, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, but we've really had a lot going on, including hats, books, our web class, and certainly our new seed company, WHS Wildlife Blends. When you click on seed on our site, it'll take you right to our brand new site for the seed company. We have all 12 blends available. So check it all out, though. I encourage you, I appreciate you checking it out. Whether you buy anything or not, really appreciate you visiting the site and seeing what's going on, and continue to watch, because we have big things coming later this year.